The Smiling Monster, the Hello Kitty Murder, and the Skull Sewn in a Doll. Welcome back to the Justice and Injustice channel, where we uncover the most disturbing secrets of true crime cases. Today, we dive into the anatomy of the infamous Hello Kitty murder, the drug-fueled sadism, the teenage witness who saw daily terror, and the haunted confession that finally exposed the smiling monster lurking behind a facade of childish innocence. In one of the most infamous crimes in Kowloon, Hong Kong, 1999, a city known for its discipline, skyscrapers, and low homicide rate. But deep inside a third-floor apartment on GranVille Road, a story of pure, depraved sadism was unfolding. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Fan Man-yee's life was anything but easy. Abandoned in her childhood, she was forced to grow up in an orphanage. However, this only lasted until she turned 15, as the orphanage had an age limit. Having never been adopted and with nowhere to live, she soon became homeless and soon after developed a drug addiction. She ended up resorting to prostitution, she working in a brothel to survive. I was just over 20 years old when I got a job as a dancer at the corporate karaoke nightclub. She eventually fell in love with one of her clients, who, unfortunately, was also a drug addict and ended up supporting her in her addiction. Despite this, they married in 1996. He soon began to abuse her. Although she stayed with the man, they had 2 children together in the following 2 years. Their fights only worsened. Neighbors were often awakened, not only by the children's screams, but also by the couple's arguments, which lasted all night. By early 1997, Fan had already started working as a prostitute again at a brothel called Romance Villa in Kowloon. After working there, she met a 34-year-old man named ChanMan-lok. It was said that he was a member of high society, known throughout the area. Fan, 23, was immediately attracted to him, as she was a drug-addicted prostitute, and he was a drug dealer who also worked as a pimp. They often spent long nights together, consuming methamphetamines or crystal meth, which he supplied. It wasn't long before Fan became part of Chan's inner circle. She was there with several of his subordinates, his henchmen, if you could call them that. ChanMan-lok was a member of the Triads, a large Chinese organized crime syndicate. He wasn't someone to mess with. In fact, he wasn't even someone one should associate with for their own safety. However, Fan felt too attracted to him. One night, during one of their many drunken binges, he stole her wallet, obtaining about $4,000. That would turn out to be the biggest mistake of his life. Chan found out and was furious. She agreed to return the $4,000 she would earn from her work. But he wasn't happy with this and demanded $10,000 in interest. Fan stated that she would need a considerable amount to pay the interest in full. ChanMan-lok was enraged by the stolen money. It wasn't even about the money itself. It was the fact that Fan had the audacity to steal from him. In March 1999, he ordered 2 of his men to kidnap Fan and take her to his apartment on GranVille Road. This apartment was not a lair of shadows. It was decorated throughout with cheerful, brightly colored Hello Kitty merchandise. A deceptive, smiling sanctuary for a nightmare. Inside, a young woman, a nightclub hostess and mother named Fan Man-yee, was being held captive. Chan forced Fan to work nonstop until her debt was paid off completely. But they were never satisfied with the money she earned. They kept increasing the interest until the debt became simply unpayable. There was no way she could cope with such a massive increase. So, in addition to making her work even harder, the gang began to take their anger out on her. They started beating her repeatedly. Often, she was left so bruised and battered that she couldn't even go to work. Despite this, the group of men continued to get high and further subjugate her. They simply enjoyed making her feel pain. When the debt went unpaid, the consequences were not just financial. They were absolute. Her crime? A petty debt, about $4,000, incurred with a member of the Triad. Over a month, fueled by constant methamphetamine abuse, 3 men inflicted a campaign of relentless, unspeakable torture upon Fan Man-yee. Beatings, burnings, starvation. ChanMan-lok, along with his 2 associates, LeungShing-cho and LeungWai-lun, decided that Fan Man-yee would pay for the debt with pain. ChanMan-lok, leader. LeungShing-cho and LeungWai-lun, subordinate gang members. ChanMan-lok is the one who dictates what they must do. LeungWai-lun was between 19 and 21 years old, and LeungShing-cho was 26. Soon, a 13-year-old girl named Fong joined the group. Although it was reported that she was the girlfriend of one of the subordinates, she ended up being a victim of Chan himself, who manipulated her more and more. Despite her young age and the evidence of manipulation, the girl was as cold as ice. She greatly enjoyed helping the group abuse Fan, even laughing hysterically while they did it. Taking advantage of any opportunity to be creative, she devised her own ways to brutalize the woman. She was always willing to join the group. The violence was not random. It was systemic and constant. The drug, known for fueling paranoia and explosive aggression, lowered any remaining inhibitions the men might have had, turning the apartment into a drug den and a torture chamber. The violence included daily beatings. Fan Man-yee was assaulted almost every day, struck repeatedly with objects like water pipes. Burnings. She was burned with hot objects, a terrifying form of torment designed to inflict maximum pain. Restraint. She was tied to a rack with her hands crossed over her head for several hours at a time, immobilized and defenseless. Starvation. She was deprived of basic necessities, weakening her physically and psychologically. They tied her up and beat her all over her body. They repeatedly forced her, even making her eat her own excrement, and began beating her with metal bars. They tied her up and used her as a punching bag. One day, she received about 50 kicks to the head. It is said that Fan became pregnant during this time, but the abuse continued. When she was injured and could barely move, the group rubbed spices into her open wounds to ensure she couldn't escape or move. They burned her legs with hot wax and even melted plastic over them. Then they forced her to drink her own urine and feces. Afterward, they forced her to smile and say that she enjoyed it all. They intensified their punishments even further. During all this time, Fan's husband and children wondered where she was. They had no choice but to worry about her and wait for her to return home. The group became increasingly creative, using anything they could find in the apartment to harm her. They used anything that could be used as a weapon on her. The group found it very amusing. They used electrical cables to hang her up and beat her with sticks, leaving her there all night. They stopped feeding her completely. The bodily fluids they subjected her to became her only sustenance. Fan would drift in and out of consciousness, waking up only to lose it again. Fan Man-yee's condition deteriorated rapidly under this relentless assault. After about a month, on April 15, 1999, Fan finally succumbed to her injuries and died, alone, cold, and in pain, while her captors were outside the house. A few days later, the group returned to the apartment. One of them went to the bathroom and found her dead on the floor. The men began arguing amongst themselves. They needed to get rid of the body, but they couldn't agree on the best way or method. They even argued about the possible cause of death. They believed it was probably an overdose, although experts agree that, as one might guess, it was the injuries that caused her death. So, for the time being, they decided to go play video games while they thought of something. Meanwhile, Fan lay on the bathroom floor. After a while, they returned home, went to sleep, and did nothing about it. The next day, Chan reached a conclusion, gathered the small group, and told them they had to destroy it. They put it in the bathtub and got to work with a handsaw. Once the body was divided into more manageable portions, they cooked each piece to prevent further decomposition and eliminate some of the smell. While boiling the pieces on the stove, Chan woke Ah-fong, who was sleeping, and shook the bag with the viscera in front of her, placing it in the hot water so they wouldn't smell bad. LeungShing-cho was fuming and called Ah-fong over to look at it. She said she was scared and didn't want to look, but he said it was okay, that she should pretend she was watching TV. She decided to take a look and thought he was right. It looked like something out of a horror movie. Since 10 hours had already passed, the group started to get quite hungry. How they could maintain their appetites while all this was happening is perhaps one of the biggest mysteries of this case. While they boiled Fan's head in a pot, stirring it occasionally, they decided to put some noodles on the adjacent burner. They used the same spoon to stir the soup they used to stir Fan's head, alternating between the two. They decided to place the skull and sew it onto the head of one of the Hello Kitty plushies. They also decided to keep a tooth and some organs. The rest they threw in the apartment complex as trash. Everything was quiet for a while. Chan felt like he had gotten away with it. But everything changed after May 1999. Since Fan Man-yee's kidnapping, the GranVille Road apartment had changed completely. That clean and tidy apartment had become a place of torture. The apartment was a macabre and ironic setting for the horrors that had taken place there, where the captors unleashed all the human depravity imaginable. The walls were adorned with Hello Kitty items, a stark and unsettling contrast to the suffering Fan Man-yee endured there. This innocent imagery acted as a grotesque camouflage, hiding the flat's true, terrifying nature. The meth-fueled hell, the silent witness, Ah-fong's terror. Perhaps the most tragic figure outside of the victim herself was the 13-year-old girl known in court only as Ah-fong. Ah-fong was a runaway who had fallen in with ChanMan-lok's dangerous group. She lived in the apartment and was forced to witness and at times participate in the daily, drug-fueled torture of Fan Man-yee. She described the flat as a place where methamphetamine use was constant and violence was frequent. For weeks, this child was saturated in an environment of absolute moral depravity, normalized to the sounds of screaming and the smell of burning skin. The psychological toll on Ah-fong must have been immense. The image of the smiling Hello Kitty dolls watching over the daily beatings, the smell of meth and blood hanging in the air, this was her forced reality. But after Fan Man-yee died, the physical body was gone, but the presence of the victim remained. The silence of the apartment was replaced by a haunting that became too much for the young girl to bear. The haunted confession, the ghost of a woman. The truth finally clawed its way out in May 1999. Ah-fong, unable to escape the psychological weight of what she had witnessed, eventually cracked. She walked into a Sin Sha Sui police station and told officers a chilling, bizarre story. She claimed she was being haunted by the ghost of a woman who had died in the GranVille Road flat. Her confession was a desperate plea for exorcism and escape. Police, skeptical but bound to follow up, accompanied the 13-year-old girl back to the apartment. What they found inside was a scene that instantaneously horrified the entire city of Hong Kong and captured international headlines. Police discovered 3 bags containing the dismembered remains of Fan Man-yee. The men had brutally dismembered her body and attempted to dispose of the parts with household trash. Some parts were never recovered. But the final discovery was the image that would define the case forever, a twisted intersection of innocence and evil. Fan Man-yee's skull had been painstakingly sewn inside a large, soft Hello Kitty mermaid plush doll. The skull, the ultimate symbol of humanity and identity, hidden within the ultimate symbol of childish innocence. It was a monstrous, depraved act of concealment. For a month, Fan Man-yee was subjected to such depraved torture that the presiding judge, Peter Nguyen, later stated, "Never in Hong Kong in recent years has a court heard of such cruelty, depravity, callousness, brutality, violence, and viciousness." Prosecutors revealed that the 3 men were high on methamphetamine for much of the month-long ordeal. Ah Fong, probably not her real name, but a pseudonym used by the system, decided to testify against the other members of the group. She said she was ChanMan-lok's girlfriend, but it was also very likely she was one of his prostitutes. When asked why she thought all this happened, she said, "I have a feeling it was for fun." Ah Fong testified in exchange for immunity and to appease Fan's ghost and finally find peace. She revealed every gruesome detail, every repugnant detail of every disturbing thing the group had done. She said she did it to alleviate her guilt and stop the persecution. During the trial, material evidence related to the case was presented in the courtroom: the refrigerator where the body was kept, the pots used for cooking, and the skull itself. It is said that the stench permeated the entire courtroom. Psychiatrists evaluated the three men, whom they described to the court as ruthless. However, there was a major obstacle in the case given the state of Fan's body. There was no clear reason what had actually happened to him. The discovery led to the immediate arrest of the three men: ChanMan-lok, LeungShing-cho, and LeungWai-lun. Their trial became a sensation, lasting 6 harrowing weeks as the full, minute-by-minute horror of the apartment was laid bare. The prosecution sought a murder conviction, but the defense argued a fatal loophole rooted in the severity of the dismemberment. Because of the condition of Fan Man-yee's remains, the medical examiner could not definitively determine the exact cause of death. The defense argued this left reasonable doubt as to whether the men had the necessary intent to kill. After intense deliberation, the jury returned a controversial verdict. All three men were convicted of manslaughter rather than murder. Justice Peter Nguyen, recognizing the inadequacy of the verdict to match the sheer depravity of the crime, delivered a scathing rebuke during sentencing. "The public is entitled to protection from people such as you." He sentenced all three men to life in prison. As for the witness, Ah Fong, she cooperated fully with the police and testified against the men, providing the essential details of the torture. She was ultimately granted immunity for her role in the case, a controversial but necessary decision to expose the sheer scale of the crime. The Hello Kitty murder remains a global symbol of the dark intersection of drug abuse, organized crime, and the terrifying depths of human sadism, forever staining the image of a simple, smiling doll. The jury convicted the men of manslaughter instead of murder due to insufficient evidence on the exact cause of death. In 2014, authorities finally returned Fan's skull, the only remaining evidence of his body, to his family, who cremated it. The apartment building located at 31 GranVille Road, Hong Kong, where the murder took place, was completely demolished in September 2012. Several years later, in 2016, it was rebuilt as a hotel, which ironically still exists. The exact spot where the murder occurred is now a restaurant. 20 years later, in 2020, it appears the trio never received parole. LeungShing-cho, who was released in April 2014, apparently through his lawyer, managed to appeal and convince the courts that there was insufficient evidence against him. But as expected, it wasn't long before he was back in the police spotlight. Recently, in January 2022, while working as a waiter, he groped the breasts of a 10-year-old girl and was subsequently sentenced to 12 months in prison. To this day, Fan Man-yee's memory is kept alive each year when the citizens of Hong Kong celebrate his life on his birthday with a candlelight vigil in the city center. The crime became infamous globally, not just for its brutality, but for the shocking discovery that ultimately brought it to light. Fan Man-yee's dismembered skull was found sewn inside a Hello Kitty mermaid plush doll.